Welcome into the Commander's Report. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Thank you guys so much for joining me here on a Friday night to talk about the latest Commanders injury news. We got a very good update when it comes to Jayden Daniels and his recovery after his elbow dislocation, as well as we got some injury reports for the Commanders and the Lions as they prepare to take on each other on Sunday afternoon here in Week 10 of the NFL schedule. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. We'll also have a post-game reaction show that comes out on this football game after they play on Sunday. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button for daily, free, entertaining, and informative Commanders content right here on YouTube. So let's just jump right into Jayden Daniels and his update today, guys. It's not as bad as what it originally looked like and what we thought. Coming out of that injury, obviously it looked really, really bad. The arm snapping and all that different stuff. It really looked like that it was going to be a pretty nasty injury with ligament damage and potentially some fractures, as well as that elbow dislocation that he suffered last Sunday night versus the Seattle Seahawks. But the good news is there was no fractures that were found, and there was also no ligament damage found inside of his arm, despite that dislocation, which is frankly pretty rare according to doctors. So it seems like we got really, really lucky with this one, guys, where Jayden Daniels is going to be, for the most part, fine. Obviously, they've popped the elbow back into place, and the fact that there was no fractures and there was no ligament damage tells us that the recovery process is going to be a lot faster than it could have been if there was fractures and ligament damage and that sort of stuff. So the team is not putting him on IR, which is kind of a miracle because, obviously if you put a guy on IR, they have to miss at least the next 4 games. And, right now the team is keeping their options open when it comes to Jayden Daniels, and the team says that they will reevaluate his situation after the bye week in Week 12. So you got 2 more games, then you have the bye week, and then the team is going to evaluate, where he's at that point in the process. But it certainly seems like, if the Commanders can keep themselves in the hunt and can keep themselves in potentially playoff contention, that Jayden Daniels will eventually potentially be able to come back and play for the Washington Commanders this year. Now, the team is already sitting at 3-6. There's really not a whole lot of margin for error, and it's certainly possible that by the time that Daniels can get back on the field, the team should not put him back on the field and risk further injury before we get into the 2026 offseason. Because he's not being put on IR and the timetable that they're giving here for his reevaluation is the bye week, that means that theoretically we could potentially see Jayden Daniels come back as soon as week 13. I can't even believe I'm saying this right now, but to potentially see Jayden Daniels back in week 13 on Sunday Night Football at Northwest Stadium in the Super Bowl era jerseys against the Denver Broncos, the same place, building, and uniforms that the team, that the situation was just last week when they played the Seattle Seahawks. If he was able to come back that quickly and he was out there being the starting quarterback of the Washington Commanders, that would be an absolute miracle. And, I think that, we should all be kind of thanking our lucky stars here that this wasn't worse than it ended up being. And, I will say that, because, there wasn't any fractures and there was no ligament damage, that tells me that, this is something that could potentially happen again. It's kind of just like the way that Jayden's body is like structurally made. And, it's something that it can kind of slip in and out of, if you kind of twist him the wrong way. So I'm hoping that this doesn't become a regular thing where he's dislocating his elbow or anything like that. But theoretically here, you got the Lions on Sunday, and then you've got the Miami Dolphins in Madrid next week. Theoretically, if the Commanders can win those 2 games, and you're sitting at 5-6, coming out of the bye with a chance to go up against the Denver Broncos team on Sunday Night Football to get back to 500. Against the Broncos team that just scored 10 points against a really bad Raider team last night on Thursday Night Football. I can't say that I can't say that that's an impossible situation where potentially Jayden Daniels could be back by that point. Now, certainly if you're losing games, certainly if the season is like officially like pretty much mathematically done, you don't bring back Jayden Daniels. And I got to say this as well, you have to be really careful with the way that with the way you manage this. You really don't want to rush him back, because the chances of the Commanders, making the playoffs this year are so small at this point in time. So if you're going to bring him back, man, you got to make sure that it makes sense to bring him back from a, we got to keep the season alive perspective, but also B, that, everything is good with him. You do not want to rush him back for any reason this season. Just the long-term ramifications are just too important for this franchise to rush Jayden Daniels back at this point. So listen, man, if he's back and he's 100% and there's no concerns whatsoever, by all means, bring him back, especially if the season is still alive. But I think that the approach needs to be an abundance of caution, let's put it that way, because this kid is the future of this organization, and there's no reason to put extra risk on this situation at the end of this year, especially if they can't beat the Lions this weekend, or if they lose these next two games and you're sitting at 3-8 and the season is over at that point. Like, it just shut him down for the rest of the season. Don't worry about it. Let him heal up. Let him get back to 100% health, and let's attack it next offseason, and let's have him 100% ready to go for when workouts for the 2026 season begin. But it's not just Jayden Daniels, guys. There's other players, obviously, that are injured, and fortunately, Terry McLaurin will be out yet again this week. That was the expectation. We got a report last week from, I believe it was Ian Rapoport, saying that McLaurin was likely going to be out this week regardless, and that has been the case now. Terry McLaurin and Jayden Daniels are the only two players on the injury report that are listed as out for this week. Quan Martin, who's dealing with a hamstring injury, Eddie Goldman, who's dealing with a concussion, Tyler Owens, who's dealing with both hamstring and neck injuries, are the ones that are questionable for Sunday. So we'll see if those guys are able to play. But obviously, Terry McLaurin being out is a big blow to this offense. It really is. It just changes the way that defenses play the Commanders. And, this is why I said it was so important to get the Terry McLaurin deal done this offseason, is because if you don't have him, then this offense completely changes. Because, a guy like Terry, an all-pro caliber receiver, that can, make tough catches, that is a great route runner, he's a deep threat, he does all those things, he commands a lot of attention and respect, and it opens up a lot of opportunities for other people. And if he's not out there, then defenses can play a lot more aggressively. They're not nearly as scared of the passing game, and they can play more in the face and, very much more aggressively versus the Washington Commanders. So, him being out is certainly going to make it tougher on Marcus Mariota and this offense to get going. But we'll see what they end up doing again against the Detroit Lions defense as they try and, keep the idea of this season still being alive, going with a win versus a good football team in the Detroit Lions at home this weekend. In terms of the Lions, a big injury for them is going to be Kirby Joseph. He's been dealing with a knee injury. He will be out this week. He's an awesome safety for them that won't be out there. But then Josh Paschal, their rotational defensive end, he's dealing with a back injury. He will also be out. Also worth noting that two of their tackles, Taylor Decker and Dan Skipper, are both going to be questionable for this game. And then Malcolm Rodriguez, you might remember him as Rodrigo a couple seasons ago on Hard Knocks, inside linebacker, he is questionable with a knee as well. So, of course, we'll see if those guys are able to play on Sunday. But with the prospect of Jayden Daniels potentially being able to come back, guys, I can't stress enough, if you want to keep your season alive, a great way to start that campaign is to beat a really good Detroit Lions team, especially if the defense shows up. Like, if the defense shows up and they play the way they did against the Lions in that divisional playoff game last year, and Joe Witt Jr., who's going to be moving from the box, the coaching box, down to the sideline this week, if that kind of creates a spark and changes something for whatever reason with this defense, that would be great news. And obviously, I think if this team is going to be able to save their season and, go on a run here towards the end. The defense is going to have to play lights out, which I don't really see happening, unfortunately. But if they can do that this weekend and, without Terry McLaurin, without Jayden Daniels, if they can beat this Lions team and keep their season alive, then, we go into Madrid week next week with, the prospect of potentially getting to 5-6 heading into the bye week, and then a real decision as to whether or not the team should maybe consider bringing back Jayden Daniels for the home stretch. So, the fact that we're sitting with that possibility here today is certainly good news. But obviously the Commanders definitely need to be playing it safe with guys like Jayden Daniels with their injuries as the season goes on. There's no question about that. So just wanted to get in front of the camera today, kind of give you guys the latest Commanders injury updates. If you guys want the most extensive Commanders coverage anywhere on YouTube, that's what we try to provide for you guys right here on the Commanders Report. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Until next time, guys, hail to the Commanders.